Hi again, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Go Giver Influencers. Today's episode, influential typist. And you'll see why in a while. This guy is one of the most prolific typists that I've ever met. You know, we often say, and you've heard me say plenty of times before, that nobody is going to buy from you because you have a quota to meet. They're not going to buy from you because you need the money. They're not even going to buy from you because you're a really nice person who believes in your product or service and feels it will help them. They're going to buy from you only because they believe they will be better off by doing so than by not doing so. And indeed, that's really the only reason anyone should buy from us. But let's take it a step further, or maybe a step prior. Nobody's going to give you their attention because you want their attention or because I want their attention. And I find myself forgetting that so often when I do outreach. People often say to me, so Bob, how do you put aside or how do you let go of your self-interest? Because remember the law of influence, law number 3 from the Go Giver, your influence is determined by how abundantly you place other people's interests first. But what if I don't want to place other people's interests first? I am self-interested, darn it. Sure you are. Of course you are. So am I. We all are, because that's human nature. That's a survival mechanism. And what John David Mann and I often say is don't deny your self-interest, because you're denying human nature, and that doesn't work. Don't deny your self-interest. Don't forego your self-interest. Simply put your self-interest aside for a bit. Just willingly suspend your self-interest. That way, you can put your focus where it needs to be, on the other person. And by doing that, they're going to be much more receptive to your message. And as we're going to learn from today's awesome guest, they're going to be much more receptive to even looking at your message in the first place. My guest today is Chris Brogan. He's a business advisor and New York Times bestselling author of 9 books and working on his 10th. Can't wait to read it. Perhaps his best known book is Trust Agents, co-authored with Julian Smith, and The Freaks Shall Inherit the Earth. I loved that book. But indeed, he's written a bunch. And you can find all of them at chrisbrogan.me/Amazon. And of course, Shannon, as she always does such a wonderful job of doing, she'll be posting that in the discussion window. He's spoken for or consulted with some of the biggest brands like Google, Microsoft, Disney, Coke, about how to share, sell, and serve the customers from their side of the story. His main website is chrisbrogan.com. Now, I want to make a suggestion, if I may. When you go to the site, check out everything Chris Brogan, because there's a wealth of information there, including his podcast, an award-winning blog, and lots more. But let me strongly suggest that you immediately subscribe to his Sunday newsletter. In my opinion, this is a not-to-be-missed Sunday read, along with your favorite cup of coffee. You'll also get to see what kind of coffee Chris is drinking every Sunday morning when he writes his newsletter. But really, it really is so fantastic. I can't tell you how much I've learned and how much I get out of that on a weekly basis. The specific link for the newsletter is chrisbrogan.com/NL. And again, that will be in the discussion window, but really do that. You'll be glad you did. Welcome, Chris.
Bob, so glad to be here, my brother. Thanks for having me.
I always love speaking with you. So when I started to let's put it this way. Anyone who has been around the internet for, I don't know, the last 10 years, maybe 15 years or whatever, I mean, they can't help but have seen your name. You've been everywhere, and you were one of the first people. I think you started the podcast conferences and anything you saw online, it was always Chris Brogan. In fact, the first time that I ever spoke with you, you had an online TV show based out of Boston. And I remember when I saw you first time, and I wanted to say, do you know who you are? I didn't say that. Fortunately, I'd have made a fool out of myself. In fact, forget any of you that you heard me say that. But do you know who you are? I mean, you're Chris Brogan. How did it get started? You grew up in Maine, not Boston, even though you live outside of Boston. You grew up tell me the story of little Chris Brogan. How did you become this social media and marketing sensation, best-selling author, the speaking at corporations all over. How did this happen?
It really shouldn't have happened. I mean, that's the real truth. As a child, I'll tell you the earliest indications that something was amiss is when I was 6 years old, I got my first bicycle. It was a Huffy Thunder Road. My mom and dad wanted me to try to learn how to ride it out on the lawn, which, by the way, now with the advent of age, I'm like, why did they try to make me ride it on the lawn? Like, you can't get any traction to move fast on the lawn. So I was horrible. A day and a quarter into owning this bike, I crashed the bike into the side of the house. And through my tears, I told my mom she should move the house because clearly it wasn't me hitting the house with the bike that was the problem. The house wasn't in the right place.
Right.
That should tell you kind of how my problem with the world started. And then, as I started as a, kid working for different companies, I worked for probably my first big grown-up job was the phone company, Ma Bell, back in the day. I was reading Tom Peters' work and that sort of thing. And I was saying all the time, this guy's brilliant. He's so great. He has this thing like the brand called you. And then shortly afterwards, I start reading other people who have similar kinds of ideas. And I think this is what I want to do. I want to help companies just really, emote and feel strong about things and whatever. And so I was kind of doomed from a reasonably young age to have to conquer the world in my own way. And so, it took me a while. I started blogging in 1998, back when it was called journaling. It took me 8 years to get my first 100 readers. Totally true. And
that's
then
amazing. That is astounding after what happened with that.
Well, you got to give it, early on, no one knew there were blogs, so they didn't know to go look. Right. But really, legitimately, it took me 8 years to get my first 100. I remember, and my friend Becky McCrae, who runs Small Business Survival, she tells this story all the time. Becky says, I remember how thrilled you were with your first 50. Like you celebrated your first 50 like you had won the lottery. And I had. And so, from there, I started podcasting, blogging in 1998 when they called it journaling. No one was around. Podcasting in 2005, which is the year after it launched, and the year before it kind of tanked the first time. Now everybody has a podcast. I was on YouTube starting in 2006. It launched in 2005. So I was kind of like early to all these services, never first, but early. I was user 10,021 on Twitter. And that one, I was like, oh, this is everything. The world is going to change. And I was partly right. I wrote the book Google Plus for Business. Google just announced they're shutting it down. So I also fail. So, all of these things, people see me as that social media guy. But the real thing is, I've always just wanted the right tools to help companies connect with people. And I don't care what it is. We could use crayons. It's totally fine by me. So I just want all companies to treat my mom better. And that's how I built my business.
I love that. I love that. I just want all companies to treat my mom better. And that's how I build my business. That's how I go about it. And that's exactly how it comes across in everything you do, because you're one of these people like my friend Terry Brock. And I believe Terry.
I love Terry Brock.
Yeah, isn't he great? And Terry is magnificent when it comes to technology and what's going to happen and this and that. And you're that set. Whereas I'm the guy who in the 90s said this internet thing will never actually work or will never take off. And that's just, we all have those things. But Terry, like you, as wonderful a presence as he has online and all the miraculous things he's done, he knows it all comes back to relationships.
Right.
And it just always does. So let me ask you this, Chris, because principles never change, but things do, specifics do. The way people do things adjusts and changes. What are the differences now that we need to know about in terms of our customers and how they want it, or prospects, what have you, and how they want to be reached? What do we need to know that we don't know right now?
I think everyone's tired of the talk to everyone at the same time experience. I think everyone's really tired of only top level advertising. I think that I've never, ever been the guy to say, don't advertise. I think advertising does a really powerful trick of providing what I think of as air support. So I think that a lot of times we need to have advertising out there to show that there's a product that may or may not be something you're interested in. And I think that money is almost always reasonably well spent, even if some ads are dopey. I think what now also has to come alongside it, though, is that we really have to do everything we can to connect up, humans with these little black chocolate bars we walk around with all the time. I think that the whole situation of we started this online space thinking that everyone who was going to ever look at our work was going to look at it on like a 30-inch monitor or a 15-inch laptop, and they were going to sit down to consume it. That's really changed in a couple different ways. One is that there's some jobs that was never true. Construction workers and construction contractors and whatnot, they run a very computerized, mechanized job where they never touch a laptop or a desktop. They're almost always on a mobile device or a tablet, right? Beyond that, I think that everyone's just so busy now that they just don't ever, quote, sit down to look at something anymore. And I think we just sample and nibble all day. So I've been looking at this concept I'm calling tiny media. The idea being, when I have your attention, how do I speak to a really specific group about a really specific way that I can help their story move along from their side of the story when they're looking at it, what they're considering. And I think that we have all these tools that we're kind of using backwards. And I know that you've probably, seen this in a lot of business stories. It's not ever that we don't have the skills. A lot of times the challenge is sequencing. And I think a lot of times we're missing out on sequencing opportunities. And so I think that what I'm trying to espouse is that companies have all the right tools. We just need to align them in sort of the right direction and reach people where they are and where they're going, and not just advertise in their direction.
Okay, so how do we do that? Let's say in talking about, as you call it, getting past the noise.
So first, I guess, one of the things, Bob, I would look at is, there's different. You can live in a certain region, for instance. You and John live in, across the county from each other. You and John are very different people. You've written books about business relationships. John has written books about how video games can make you smarter at life and business. Two different humans in the same chat room at the same time right now. The kind of way that I want to sell to John and help John kind of move his story ahead is very different than what I would want to share with you. And so I think that companies need to look at, how do we package small consumable pieces of media that are going to speak to a buyer in their language, sort of at their point of need. So I think there's, for instance, these tools like podcasting and making video and all that. I think they're great. I think we need to really start looking at, how do I tell the story really specific to the kind of person I want to reach. If I want to reach moms on the go, if I want to reach stay-at-home parents, if I want to reach people who are getting ready to have the empty nest, I have to make new and specific stories for each of them. So that's kind of where I'm going with all this. And I'm trying to work out the story support, both language, logistics, business tie-ins, and technology, to make that work for all the various companies that I have the pleasure to work with.
Okay, so I'm thinking back as you're talking about this. I'm thinking back to a couple of your recent articles, and it seems like maybe 2 or 3 of your Sunday newsletter that I talk
Sure.
about. And you were talking about story, and I'm trying to think exactly what you were saying here because it was so profound. But it was about putting the story, I guess, framing the story in such a way that they related to it. I'm not coming up with the right words, but it was as they live that story. And do you know what I'm referring to?
Boy, I sure hope so. One way that I've been using, and this language hasn't really come out into the public eye yet, but in my writing, one of the ways that I'm talking about it in my upcoming book is I'm talking about moving the camera. So one of the ways that I talk about that is, and I'm trying to bring up my newsletter really fast so I can make sure what we blocks and set pieces and story support. Those are the two that you're probably talking about. One of the things that, I'm looking at is, so companies, no matter what you sell, let's say you sell, there's a industrial tool supply company right next door to me. They're a hardware store. The way you sell hardware to people is you say, working on that deck, we've got the supplies to make you totally successful in the deck. You don't have to go to a big store with an orange apron. You can go here. It's going to be fine. Right. The other one is the other story that they could tell. One of them is, are you the kind of person who is not especially tool inclined? we will not make you feel stupid. Come in, we will help you get smarter. I mean, there's so many ways that you could talk to and build, business connections. That at the end of the day, it's just making the same kind of content people have been pushing on you to make. Mm-hmm. But I really need people to start thinking, like, what few hundred people, what 1,000 people at a time can I really speak to? People coming back from overseas, military people coming back from overseas are looking, how do they transition into business? Because they have all these skills that don't exactly one-to-one to the real life. That's a set, right? So you talk to that set. And so I think that there's lots of opportunities out there. And I think companies have to be bold enough to say, we're going to go after these at about 1,000 at a time. And it's great if you're a mom and pop and you have 30 customers. It's a little scary if you're M&M or Coke. Mm-hmm. So.
Okay. So you brought up a point that really just struck me. You could probably hear me going, while you're saying it, because when you talked about the two types of people who might be needing building supplies, okay, both sort of positioned against the big guy, and with one you're saying, you don't have to go to the big one, but the other one was me you were talking to, because you were saying, basically if you've got 10 left thumbs, okay, if you are not someone who can build anything in any way, if you're right, and that's me, and anyone who knows me knows that's true, now you've got my attention. Because if you say, well, you don't have to go to the big guys, well, okay, but what good does that do me?
Right.
But if you say, if you can't build anything, don't worry about it. We're going to help you with this. Okay, now you've got my attention.
Right. And I think that's out there. I mean, my son is 12 years old. He's getting more and more and more involved in electronics. And I went in there and said, he needs some really little tools. He needs like really tiny tools, because we're trying to use regular Phillips head screwdrivers, and he's trying to like work on circuit boards for robots. And they were smiling politely at me, like, I have no idea what you're talking about. But they did know what tiny tools were, and they walked it over. But I thought, my gosh, there's more than my 12-year-old son out there building little robots. If they put together home circuit board kits, like what Radio Shack used to do for you back before they stopped being a brand, there's another set of buyers, right? It's not saying don't sell. It's saying sell the hell out of something, but sell it to exactly the buyer in exactly the language they need to hear.
Now, when you talk about tiny media and when you talk about this kind of messaging, is it necessary to just, find that tiny little niche and just do it with that? Or can you, let's say, again, let's go back to that building company or what have you, the tools, can you actually market segment doing this? And does that tend to work out right?
If I were a bigger company and I had a couple of people to help with marketing technology, I would demand that kind of segmentation. So I think what's coming next in sort of data history and CRM, client relations management software, and all that sort of a thing, I think we really need to have marketing messages of one. And I really think that what has to happen is, I do all of my own stuff. Rob Hatch and I, like the closest I have to a help is Rob Hatch, who's, president of the same company. But we're it. So I can't make 300 segments and super customize my message to that. But at the minute you have a marketing team of 4 or more people, you have the opportunity to really kind of group this into a bunch of clusters. And I think that the next step or the next opportunity or the big important thing to do next is speak to those little groups a bunch at a time, but specifically to those groups. It's going to mean more work. If you have someone making, for instance, video assets, you're going to have lots of little video assets, sliced so that the first and last parts might be the only personalized part. The middle kind of tells the story that you're supposed to tell about the product. But there's going to be more of that. And I think that modular content and sort of choose your own adventure content, if you remember those books, I think that's kind of what's coming. And I think also it's what we've always wanted, right? No one's ever said, I really can't wait to feel like yet another sheep in the pen. No one ever says, I can't wait to feel like you completely just use the first name field on your email list. We all want to be treated like someone sees us. It's the most important thing. And I think it's a little bit depressing that we're in a world still where you could go into a bathroom in a movie theater and it knows you're there. It knows you left. It knows you did what you needed to get done. and it knows more about you than any marketing company ever does.
Yeah, that's sad. We've got about 10 minutes left. And so if you have any questions, and I'm going to go look at the field in a moment. I know Chris, who can actually multitask apparently, because you've got your Facebook on and your wife, because I noticed you're conversing with people. So thank you so much for that. First though, remember Chris's website is chrisbrogan.com. Go there, learn everything Chris. Make sure you subscribe to his Sunday newsletter, his podcast, his blog, get his books. And Shannon, I know has been posting that. Okay, before we move on, let me do the multitasking thing here and look to see if anybody has any questions. Oh, Mindy McFadden McAllister, I'm taking from this not to use a cookie cutter approach to each customer. Yep, that is great. Hey, there's Tim Gillette. But yes, Mindy, absolutely. Tim Gillette joined. Tim's a great guy. Been on his podcast before. Matt Parr. Chris says Chris Brogan is a master of communication, especially in business. I would agree. Yeah, John Harrison, treat me as an individual, make me feel special is what I get from this. And yeah, and Chris does that absolutely. Let's see, lots of comments, not a lot of questions, but that's okay. That happens a lot. We're just enjoying Chris's wisdom. Gil Sugar, hi Gil. He says few businesses have a single definition of their ideal client, but a few market to multiple segments. Great advice. Thanks. And okay, now, Chris, anything you want to say before we move on?
You know what? I am grateful, as always, Bob, to talk. I think that the fear, especially if some of the people here are like really small or solo-ish business people, because some are, I think the fear is there's no way this is applying to me. There's no way I'm going to do this. I can't do it. But if you've read my newsletter, and a lot of the people in the comments, this is like a stacked deck for comments because I've got a lot of people I know in there. But if you see my newsletter, I talk to 26,000 people as if I'm talking to one, and I invite the feedback. I invite the reply. At every turn, I'm asking people to hit reply, and I'm one guy. And I can tell you that, you know, Richard Branson responds to his own stuff. All the big famous people that I talk to, a lot of them do. And the only people that ever seem to have like a staff to reply for them are the people who you won't want to talk to anyway.
That's
so
true. Yeah.
I think that don't worry if you're not big enough. Worry that you don't want to do this. Because if you don't want to do it, if you don't want to connect with people, then it's a little bit less accurate that you're going to have a good experience. But if you are having trouble getting the kind of customers you want, and if you're not, you know, getting repeat customers and that sort of a thing, this is where to look. Relationships, how to drive better connection, and how do you earn that right to sell and serve? I think that's where you got to look. And
you hold a lot of webinars. The webinars are a big part of your business at this point. You teach how to do this as well, correct?
Yeah. So for my small business buyers, I do advisory and consulting work for bigger companies, but, you know, to pay for a day of my time is pretty cost prohibitive to lots of human beings. And so I came up with the idea that, who doesn't have $20 and you can go spend $20 on a webinar. We joke that $20 is the new free, because if you're actually looking to improve your business, then 20 is not a whole lot of money.
Right.
So I can tell you that in our webinar business, what we do is we just give people enough executables to run out and try something, and then come back and ask if they got any other questions. And it's been fun. And I'll tell you, the funniest thing is that when I work with the really biggest companies, I tell them the same sorts of things I say to people for just $20 on a webinar. And every now and again, I see a really big company, like, I won't name anybody, but it rhymes with Schmerican Express, on my $20 webinar, getting something that they wouldn't pay 15 grand for. Mm-hmm. So, it happens.
Mm-hmm. Jeff West writes, Chris, could you give some points about how to get the information from your potential clients in order to segment your lists?
I have a great answer for this, Jeff. I'm so glad you asked it. Every single email client of any power has in it ways to tag and segment and all that. You have the tools to do it. So you're asking, how do you ask them to do it? You give them every opportunity to self-identify. You can ask questions to your list as often as you want. You can grab clumps of your list as often as you want. And you could say, I'm trying to think of something that's not frivolous, like Game of Thrones versus something, but you can ask really simple Tinder level questions, like swipe left, swipe right kind of questions, and start to build on this. So I measure and connect as many different tags as I can on a human. So for Bob Burg, who has been on my list for a bunch of years, there's probably 106 tags that make up Bob. So then I can do a little bit of psychography, and I can sort of look and say, gee, I noticed that this is what keeps Bob's interest. I notice every time I mention a topic like this that falls into this category in my world, Bob clicks it. He doesn't always buy, but he clicks it every time. So I know that's in his mind. Then I have other people who click everything, and I throw their data out because who knows what they're doing. So I think they're just like obsessive, like bubble wrap poppers. So, that's one way I do it, Jeff, is I just ask one or two questions every now and again. And even as something as simple as, what are you drinking? I ask that question every like 3 or 4 newsletters. If someone gets grumpy, I put a grumpy tag on them because I know this person's probably not my buyer, because the kind of person who wants like, reptilian, brutal German level efficiency, that like must be within millimeters kind of thing, like good engineering is known for, then they're not going to be my buyer. People who ask me, how do I make $2 million a day while on a beach? They're definitely not my buyer. So I do a lot of little, demographic stuff to sort of figure that out. So that's kind of the deal.
Jeff, who was at one time, and he's been a guest on this show as well as my podcast. He's also a best-selling author, and he was a major top sales producer for many, many years. And now he is doing a very good online business. Jeff's one of these guys, whatever he does, he does well at, because he learns systems, he follows it and so forth. So I can absolutely see how Jeff would be picking up on something exactly like that. Is it intimidating though? Especially, let's say if you're me, or you're now, of course, my business partner is a genius. And so she's able to hear what you said, and she'd immediately be thinking, okay, here's how I do this, this, and that. But let's say you've got someone like me who doesn't have a brilliant business partner, or people like Shannon on the team, or people like Leslie, and people who do so much to support me with all my weaknesses. And they, what about that person though, who doesn't have that other person? Can they kind of figure out, based on what you're saying, how to tag people in those ways, or ask the questions that will elicit people giving them their information? Or is it just one of those things you got to gut through?
Every email service provider has really deep tutorials. And so you just have to kind of Google, if you're a MailChimp person, how do I add a tag? How do I add a segment? How do I whatever? So there's usually little video tutorials that work for every single one of your platforms. MailChimp, Constant Contact, Infusionsoft. Infusionsoft is nicknamed Confusionsoft. And I say that at every turn, which is why they probably don't invite me to their conferences anymore. But it's good software. Like, it's really, really in depth though. And I'm not a wizard at it either. But, when I look at the how-to, it's like, oh, that's how you do it. I'm totally blanking. Whatever. Nathan has a really good one. Anyway, there's lots of good technology out there. Never worry about the tech side of it. However, I say this to everybody, and my parents never let me say their age, but they're of the age that they could have a 48-year-old son. My parents got through all this technology too. So I never let anyone's age define their technological challenges. I often say to people, you don't have to know like how to build a Gutenberg press to write a book, but you do kind of have to know at least how to scratch into something. Most every technology we use these days is copy paste easy. So it's not that you have to be an outer wizard. You just have to be willing to kind of look at a few YouTube videos. And what I say to everyone, this is so important, just be okay to look stupid every now and again. I look stupid only on days that end in Y, Bob.
Same
on
here.
The other days of the week, I look super brilliant. But on days that end in Y, I give myself permission to look stupid. And I tell you, that has saved me so much time in my life, because I never feel depressed for that. I feel depressed for biochemical reasons, like, oh, it's raining, I should be miserable.
So I lots of nice shout outs in here, lots of great comments. This has been fantastic. So let's do that. if there's only one thing, which there never is, but if there was that one thing that you said was the most important to make a connection with someone today, what is that one thing?
I have to give you kind of a holy trinity.
That's
I'm
okay.
so sorry. I'm so
sorry.
sorry.
Well, because there usually isn't one thing.
There isn't. I'm laughing at Matt Parr saying that looking stupid seems to be my new normal. That's Matt's a entrepreneurial genius, millions of dollars in revenue kind of guy, who also was a special forces medic. So not just special forces, which is the hardest part of the military, but a medic, meaning I'll work on you while other people are shooting at both of us.
That's right.
You know, so him
hero.
saying he looks stupid is, you know, such a rarity. The three things that I say you have to have, I believe, is I think you need a good email platform. I think you need, you got to get into video, and you probably should have a blog or a website that you can easily edit. Even if that's a freebie on Wix, it doesn't matter. Email, video at YouTube at least, and some kind of a website. And the reason that you need all three of those, email is because no matter what other mediums are out there, the fact that YouTube has, you know, 100 million hours of content consumed every day, et cetera. Oh, on a set-top box. Sorry, it's 1 billion hours consumed daily. It's 100 million on a set-top box, meaning it supplants 100 million hours of TV viewing. If you're not on YouTube, you're like wondering why no one knows who you are. Even if you have 20 views on a video, and even if you have 400 subscribers, you might get the most important subscriber ever from that. And that's all you got to know. Email marketing, because no matter how many platforms are out there, we are still slaves to our inbox. Nobody ever yells at us on YouTube without our permission. But, you know, we get yelled at, and we have to look for important things in our inbox all the time. So that's the other reason. And a blog, because Google's your friend and search is your friend. And, you know, for as much as people try to tell me that blogging is dead, search isn't dead, and search looks at websites. And so I think having the ability to write and edit and make stuff happen is a pretty useful tool.
Chris Brogan is a business advisor, New York Times bestselling author of 9 books. Remember, working on his 10th. You can find them all at the link Shannon has been posting. Actually, she's posting that link, but I'm just going to give you right here, chrisbrogan.com, because everything about Chris, not everything, but lots of stuff about Chris, everything he has to offer us is there, and you can find it. As mentioned earlier, be sure and subscribe to that Sunday newsletter. I can't tell you what a gem that is. Chris speaks, consults with some of the biggest brands in the world. And what I'm going to suggest, if you're a company that's planning a conference, absolutely be sure and connect with Chris through his website. If you're really fortunate, you'll be able to find a time where he can come in to speak at your conference. He's that good, and everyone's going to love him, and he makes a wonderful connection. As always, if you haven't picked up John David Mann's and my newest book, The Go-Giver Influencer, for those of you who like parables, not everybody does, but if you do, make sure to go to thegogiver.com. Let's see. Kathy Tajanel's in my next Go-Giver Entrepreneurs Academy. It is going to be in January. Remember, we limit that to 10 people. We go deep into your business over a 2-day period, and it's lots of fun. Breakthroughs occur there. If you'd like to join our team of Go-Giver speakers, go to gogiverspeaker.com. Hey, be sure and join our Facebook group, which is Go-Giver Influencers, and all these URLs will be in the show notes. Shannon, thanks again for the wonderful job you always do. Chris Brogan, thank you for being such a great friend and a terrific human being. I wish you the best of continued success.
Always my pleasure. Thanks so much, Bob. Thank you for having me on. It was a total honor.
And thank you, everyone, for joining us. We'll be back again next week. And until then, I'm Bob Burg, wishing you a great day and a terrific week. Bye-bye.